Arthur Vance was not a man who believed in luck. He believed in calloused hands, early mornings, and the quiet mathematics of compound interest. At 67, he stood in the kitchen of his lakeside home, a modest, cedar-shingled house he'd built himself in 1985, and watched the sunrise bleed orange over the water. His hands, knotted with arthritis, rested on a ceramic mug. He didn't drink the coffee. He just held it for the warmth. Beside him, his wife of 43 years, Eleanor, hummed a tune from their youth. Her hair was the color of winter snow, but her eyes still held the fire of the girl who danced with him at the county fair. They had 3 children, 2 daughters who called every Sunday and 1 son. Michael. Michael was the youngest, the accident, the child who arrived 10 years after they'd closed the factory on their reproductive years. Perhaps that was the problem, Arthur often thought. By the time Michael came along, Arthur's hardware store had grown into a regional chain. There was money, there was ease, there was no struggle to sharpen a boy's character. Michael was handsome, charming. He had the kind of smile that made people want to lend him money, and for a long time Arthur had been one of those people. "Did you sleep?" Eleanor asked, not turning from the stove where eggs were beginning to crisp. "Enough," Arthur lied. He hadn't slept in 6 months, not since the letter, but he wasn't ready to talk about that yet. Instead, he watched a loon dive beneath the glassy surface of the lake and wondered if birds ever felt betrayed by their own kind. Michael Vance graduated from college with a degree in finance and a debt of gratitude he never intended to repay. Arthur had paid for every semester, every textbook, every spring break trip to Cancun. He bought Michael a condominium in the city as a graduation gift, a gesture that made his daughters, Sarah and Claire, exchange a look that said, "There it is again." But Arthur was a practical man. He believed in legacy. And Michael, for all his flaws, had vision. At 25, Michael proposed expanding the family business into private equity. Arthur was hesitant. Hardware was honest. You could hold a hammer. You could feel the weight of a galvanized pipe, but numbers on a screen, that felt like gambling dressed in a tie. Still, Michael was persuasive. He laid out spreadsheets. He talked about synergies and market inefficiencies. He used words Arthur didn't understand but wanted to trust. So Arthur wrote a check for $2 million, a seed investment he called it. Eleanor cried that night, not because she didn't believe in Michael, but because she saw what Arthur could not. The hunger in their son's eyes was not ambition. It was emptiness. The first year, Michael doubled the money. He bought a penthouse. He bought a watch that cost more than Arthur's first truck. He stopped coming to Sunday dinners. When he did show up, his phone was a third guest at the table, buzzing, demanding, alive in a way that Michael himself no longer seemed to be. Arthur said nothing. Eleanor said little more. But the silence between them grew heavy, like furniture no one knew how to move. Then came the invitation. Michael was getting married. Her name was Vanessa. She was a consultant with perfect teeth and a laugh that never reached her eyes. The wedding was on a private island in the Bahamas. Arthur and Eleanor packed their bags, but Sarah called the night before they were supposed to leave. "Dad, did you see the guest list?" Arthur hadn't. "There's no one from our side, no cousins, no aunts, no old family friends. It's all his business partners and her colleagues." Arthur dismissed it. Young people did things differently. But when they arrived, when they stood on that white sand and watched their son exchange vows with a woman who didn't bother to learn Eleanor's name, Arthur felt something crack inside him. Not break. Crack. Like ice on a lake in spring, thin, dangerous, hiding the cold water beneath. The marriage lasted 14 months. Vanessa left with a settlement and a designer handbag collection. Michael didn't seem sad. He seemed inconvenienced, like a man whose car had gotten a flat tire. He threw himself back into work, and that was when the trouble began. Arthur never learned the full truth. He only knew that one morning, a federal investigator knocked on his door. The agent was polite, professional. He asked about wire transfers, about shell companies, about a series of transactions that appeared to move money from Michael's fund into accounts that didn't exist anymore. Arthur's hands shook as he poured coffee for the stranger. He answered every question honestly, because that was the only way he knew how to live. But when the agent left, Arthur sat in his armchair for 3 hours, staring at a photograph of Michael at age 7, holding a rainbow trout, grinning with 2 missing teeth. The investigation went nowhere. No charges were filed, but the damage was done. Michael's investors pulled their money. His partners resigned. The fund collapsed, and with it the $2 million Arthur had invested, money that was meant to be split equally among all 3 children. Michael didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He showed up at the lake house one evening, sat down at the kitchen table and said, "I need you to cover my legal fees, just in case." Arthur looked at his son, really looked. Michael was 34 years old, his hair was thinning, his eyes were bloodshot. He wore a suit that cost $5,000, but he wore it like a costume, like a boy playing dress-up in his father's closet. "No," Arthur said. The word surprised him. It surprised Alina more. She dropped a spoon. It clattered against the tile floor, and the sound seemed to echo for minutes. Michael stared. "No, no," Arthur repeated. "I will not throw good money after bad. I will not enable you any longer. You are my son, and I love you. But I will not pay for a lawyer to defend decisions you made without consulting me, without consulting anyone, decisions that have hurt this family in ways you don't even understand." Michael stood up, his chair scraped backward. His face, Arthur would remember this for the rest of his life, his face did not register sadness or anger or shame. It registered disbelief, as if his father had just spoken a language Michael did not speak. "You'll regret this," Michael said, and then he walked out the door. That was the last time Arthur saw his son for 3 years. The phone calls stopped. The texts stopped. Michael unfriended his parents on social media, a small, petty act that somehow hurt more than the financial ruin. Sarah and Claire tried to mediate. They sent messages. They left voicemails. Michael responded to none of them. He moved to a different city, changed his number, and vanished into the anonymous crowd of the wealthy and the wrecked. Alina cried every day for 6 months. Arthur held her. He cooked meals she didn't eat. He took her for walks along the lake, and they fed the ducks in silence. He did not speak Michael's name because every time he tried, the word got stuck in his throat, a fish bone of grief that wouldn't go down. Years passed, the lake froze and thawed, the children grew older. Sarah had twins, Claire got married. Life, stubborn and relentless, continued. Arthur retired. He sold the hardware chain to a national company and put the money into trusts for his grandchildren. He and Alina downsized not to a smaller house but to a smaller life. Fewer obligations, fewer expectations. They gardened, they read. They attended church on Sundays and sat in the same pew they'd sat in for 30 years. And Arthur sometimes wondered if God could see the hole in his chest where his son used to live. Then Alina got sick. It was pancreatic cancer, the kind that doesn't announce itself until it's already moved in and rearranged the furniture. Arthur became a nurse, a cook, a chauffeur, a husband in the truest sense of the word, which is to say he showed up. Every day, every hour. He held her hand during chemo. He cleaned up messes no one warns you about in wedding vows. He read to her from the romance novels she loved, books with happy endings he no longer believed in. And through it all he did not call Michael. Pride, perhaps, but also something else. A cold, hard knowledge that Michael would not come, that Michael had chosen his path and the path had led away from them. Sarah called Michael when Alina was admitted to hospice. She left a voicemail, then another, then a text. "Mom is dying, come home." No response. Claire drove to Michael's last known address, a high-rise in a city 4 hours away. The doorman said Mr. Vance no longer lived there, hadn't for over a year. Claire left a letter with the concierge. The letter came back unopened, marked "Return to sender." Alina died on a Tuesday. The sky was the color of a robin's egg. Arthur was holding her hand when her breathing changed, when the long pause between inhale and exhale grew longer still until the exhale did not come. He didn't call for a nurse. He didn't cry. He simply laid his head on her chest, listened to the silence where her heart had been, and said, "I'll see you soon, my love." The funeral was small. Sarah and Claire planned it. Arthur sat in the front row and stared at the casket, Birch wood, because Alina had loved birch trees and he did not look at the empty row behind him, the row where Michael should have sat. The mourners sang hymns. The pastor spoke of love and faithfulness and the narrow gate. Arthur shook hands with people he didn't recognize. He ate casserole. He thanked everyone for coming. He did not break down until that night, alone in the house, when he opened Alina's closet and breathed in the scent of her, lavender soap and garden soil and something else, something indefinable, the ghost of a woman who had loved him despite every flaw. Then he broke. He broke like a wave on rocks. He broke like a promise. He broke because grief is not a feeling. Grief is a place you live until you forget there was ever anywhere else. 6 months after Alina's death, Arthur received a letter, not from Michael, about Michael. It came from a lawyer in the city where Michael had last been seen. The letter was brief, clinical, devastating. Michael had been found in a studio apartment, not a penthouse, not a high-rise, but a cramped, dirty unit above a laundromat. He was alone. He had been dead for 3 days before the landlord noticed the smell. Cause of death: liver failure complicated by malnutrition and chronic alcohol abuse. He was 41 years old. Arthur read the letter 3 times. The words did not change. He set it down on the kitchen table, the same table where Michael had last sat, where he had said, "You'll regret this," and walked outside. The lake was gray. The sky was gray. The world had become a photograph of itself, drained of color, drained of meaning. He walked to the end of the dock. He looked down at the water. He thought about stepping in. He thought about the cold, the darkness, the quiet. He thought about Alina, about her hand in his, about the way she used to say his name, Arthur, like it was a prayer. And then he thought about Michael, his son, his only son, the boy who had caught that rainbow trout, the boy who had scraped his knee learning to ride a bike, the boy who had once, at age 4, crawled into Arthur's lap during a thunderstorm and whispered, "Daddy, don't let the sky break." Arthur turned around. He walked back to the house. He sat down at the table and read the letter a 4th time. Then he did something he had not done in years. He cried. Not the quiet, dignified tears of a funeral, not the exhausted sobs of a grieving widower. He cried the way a child cries, open-mouthed, helpless, loud. He cried for Alina. He cried for Michael. He cried for the family he had tried to build and the son he had lost twice, once to wealth and once to death. The letter included an inventory of Michael's possessions. There was almost nothing: a laptop, a phone, a suitcase of clothes that didn't fit, a bank account with $47, and one photograph. Arthur requested the photograph. It arrived a week later in a padded envelope. He opened it with trembling hands. The photograph was old, creased, faded, soft at the edges. It showed a man, a woman, and 3 children standing in front of a cedar-shingled house. The man was younger, stronger, his arm around the woman's waist. The children were small, 2 girls in matching dresses and a boy in a baseball cap, grinning with 2 missing teeth. Arthur recognized the photograph. It had hung in Michael's childhood bedroom. It was the only thing Michael had kept, the only thing he had carried with him into that lonely apartment, into that lonely death. Arthur pressed the photograph to his chest. He understood then what he had not understood before. Michael had not chosen wealth over family. Michael had been chasing wealth because he believed, somewhere deep in his broken heart, that money could fill the hole where love was supposed to go. He had been wrong. The hole only grew. It grew until it swallowed him whole. And Arthur, in his pride, in his hurt, had let him go. He had not chased after him. He had not hired a private investigator. He had not pounded on doors and made a scene and refused to let his son disappear. He had sat by the lake and waited, and the waiting had become a kind of death of its own. But grief, Arthur learned, is not the end of the story. Grief is the beginning of the rest of your life, whether you want it or not. He went to therapy. He started talking, not just about Alina, but about Michael, about the guilt, about the what-ifs, about the night he had said no and the 3 years of silence that followed. And the question that would never have an answer: what if he had said yes? His therapist, a young woman named Dr. Patel, listened without judgment. She told him something he would never forget. You cannot save someone who refuses to be saved, but you can forgive yourself for trying, and you can forgive yourself for stopping. Arthur wrote a letter to Michael. He knew Michael would never read it. He wrote it anyway. He wrote it by hand on paper the way his father had taught him. He wrote about the fishing trip, the bike ride, the thunderstorm. He wrote about Alina's last days, about the way she had whispered Michael's name in her sleep. He wrote about forgiveness, not the easy kind, but the hard kind, the kind that costs you something. He sealed the letter in an envelope and drove to the cemetery. He visited Alina's grave first. He placed a stone on her headstone the way the old traditions taught. Then he walked to a different section of the cemetery, a newer section where a small marker bore Michael's name and dates. There were no flowers, no stones, no evidence that anyone had visited since the burial. Arthur knelt. His knees cracked. The grass was wet with dew. He took the letter from his pocket and held it over the grave. He considered burying it. He considered burning it. Instead, he opened the envelope, unfolded the paper, and read the letter aloud. His voice was rough, broken, barely a whisper. He read every word. And when he was finished, he folded the letter, tucked it back into the envelope, and placed it beneath a small rock on the headstone. Let the rain take it, he thought. Let the sun fade it. Let the world do what it will. I have said what I needed to say. He stood up. He looked at the sky. It was blue now, not robin's egg, but a deeper blue, the blue of a promise kept. He thought of Alina. He thought of Michael. He thought of Sarah and Claire, of the twins, of Claire's husband and the new baby on the way. He thought of the cedar-shingled house by the lake, and the ducks, and the loon, and the quiet mathematics of compound interest. How small investments grow over time. How a little love given daily becomes a fortune. How a little neglect becomes a debt you cannot repay. Arthur Vance walked back to his car. He drove home. He fed the ducks. He called Sarah to say goodnight. He told Claire he loved her. And then he sat on the dock alone and watched the sunset bleed orange over the water. The world was still gray in places. It would always be gray in places, but the gray was not the whole story. The gray was only the background. The foreground, the living, breathing, aching foreground, was still being written. He picked up his pen. He turned to a blank page. And he began. The story you have just heard is fiction, but the truth it tells is real. Families fracture, children wander, parents fail. And sometimes the people we love most disappear into a version of themselves we do not recognize. If you are a parent estranged from a child or a child estranged from a parent, know this. The door does not have to stay closed. The phone call does not have to remain unmade. Pride is a poor companion in old age. Regret is a heavier burden than forgiveness. Michael Vance died alone in a studio apartment above a laundromat, clutching a photograph of a family he had walked away from. He paid a heavy price for choosing wealth over love. But the heavier price was paid by the father who watched him go and did not run after him. Do not make the same mistake. Love is not a spreadsheet. Family is not a transaction. And the only wealth that matters at the end of your life is the wealth of hands held, voices heard, and faces remembered. Go. Make the call. Write the letter, knock on the door. The sky is not breaking, not yet. There is still time.